I'm an editor with Fix My Hog, and we're here for the September live event to go over some of the things with your stereo system and a lot of electrical things. So it's going to be a pretty cool live event we have here today. Two things before we get going and get grinding on this live event. We have some cool stuff. I've got a chat box pulled up right now, and you can submit questions to me as we go throughout this live event. So feel free, if you haven't already put your question in the queue here, go ahead and pull up fixmyhog.com and check out the new chat box. And also right below the little video here, you'll see a banner that is free to download on Essential Tools and kind of give you a run through on what you need as a basic kind of starter kit for your bike, or what to have around the garage and to work on your bike. So make sure you download that and take a peek at this chat box. We got a ton of questions today, so the last 20 minutes of this event, I'm going to get to those questions and we'll get grinded. So as I mentioned, we're going to be going through your stereo system on the stock touring bagger Harley, and there's a lot to go through on this. So I'm going to go through some of the tools to be using on here, some of the speaker gauge wires, tweeters, speakers, all the above. So it's going to be cool stuff. All right, we're going to kick it off. One big thing I want to mention before we even start on any of this is that the warranties on your Harley bikes, you want to make sure you thoroughly understand what that warranty is, because immediately once you touch that radio or deck, speakers, Harley can pull that warranty right from you. So if you don't have a authorized shop and you don't go to a Harley dealership to get that work done on your stereo, make sure you check it out if you're going to tune it in your garage and start playing with it, because they're pretty good about making sure you can't get that warranty after you touch it. And then same thing with customizing as we go through your stereo system. As some of you may know already, there's a lot of aftermarket speaker covers, mounts, just cool little cosmetic stuff that you can do. But today I want to focus on fine-tuning your stereo, and if you were to change out the deck and things like that. So a few of the components on our stereo system and amps, tweeters, it's an entire, obviously, music system, so to speak, and there's different gauge wires we have on there, and the reason being is they're drawing a lot more power than you typically see. And this will play into some of the troubleshooting down the road here. But right here, as you can see, we have a thicker gauge wire, and we use these for the amps. You'll see this in your stock Harley setup as a larger gauge wire that will draw back from your amp to your battery with a fuse in there, which is commonly one of the items that will pop and go out on your stereo system. So this is a larger gauge wire that we use. I also use a blue and typically a black one that we have up here when wiring them. That way we have our ground, we have our power, and then we have our remote, which is sometimes a thinner, like a 12 gauge blue wire that you'll see pulling out, and that's kind of your control coming out of the amp. With our deck, on the other hand, your radio face coming out of there, it's pretty much a plug and play. So anything that you may do in the future with changing out your radio deck, it's more on the end of cosmetics, or if you're running a Bluetooth MP3 player, it's kind of preference on that point. I don't want to say you can take this, this one's better than the other one. It's all on your preference with that. So out of the back of that's a plug and play system, and that blue wire will pop up to that. So I'm going to touch a little bit more on this further, but I want to kind of get the hands dirty here and show you a few things on how to properly get your stereo system set up without any wiring issues, because when it comes down to it, it's all wiring. That's all that's going through. So with the stereo system, we're going to have wires, and I want to kind of run through some of the basic tools so we're all on the same page, and how to properly use them, because these go pretty quick, and people sometimes misuse the tools or don't get a good crimp. So I want to make sure everyone knows kind of that route. What we have here is just easy splicers. Same thing with these vice grip ones. Pull back the insulation of the wire and get the wire exposed on there. And then I use these for crimping some of the terminals as well. We have our rosin core. Never use acid or lead. It's always rosin. That way it doesn't affect the actual wire. And then we have our pencil soldering, and our actual soldering gun. These are preference. Again, this one stays hot once you plug it in, but it's, again, preference. So what I want to do is I actually want to show you guys how to properly solder this, and this is going to play into some of the speaker wires that we do moving forward. So what we're going to do is we want to take about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch down of the insulation. So we have the insulation right here. All we're going to do is strip it off. These are my cheaters, so we don't have to actually pull it all the way down. And then we want about that much to be exposed on there. I'm just going to cut this in half so we can get this side and do the same thing. Well, if it wants to. All right. And you'll see at this point that we've got the wire exposed. And when we put connectors on this, I'm going to show you that next. I typically like to solder those on as well because there's a lot of loose wires that we get with the stereo systems, and this is one way to avoid it pretty quickly off the bat. So instead of wrapping these wires around each other, typically what we do is put the wires in like that. Hopefully you guys can see that one right there. We put them in and we just pinch them together. And what that does is it gives us typically a nice little, can you see that? That's it gives you a nice smooth base. When you wrap it around, you're going to get some of the wires that actually pop out, and if you have a hot wire or hot lead wire coming out of any component on your bike, it has the potential to ground out and then short out your entire system. So it's little things like this on the electrical side and more so on the stereo side that you want to keep a close eye to. So we're going to see if these wires are going to cooperate this morning. So when soldering these wires, I've seen too many people in the past put the solder right over the wire. And what we want to actually do is get the solder inside the wire. So we're going to heat the wire at one end, I like to do, and to get the gun going here. Sometimes these take a minute to spark up. And then I like to feed it from this side, but we're going to start going in a little bit here. And then you'll slowly see the solder going in the wire. If you're a perfectionist and too detail-oriented like me, you're going to start going through getting some of these high spots out. So it's all about cleanness and function with this. So here we have, I'd like to say, a pretty decent one. What we're going to do is this side, crimp it in. But other than that, it's looking pretty darn good. So with wiring, this is where you have it. A lot of people put electrical tape. I'm going to run you through heat shrink. It's probably one of the better, cleaner ways to cover up your wires, and it's got an extra layer of protection when you actually melt it over. Heat shrink it. So all we're doing is taking a 1/4 inch piece of heat shrink, which come in different varieties and sizes, slipping it over the wire, and then putting it right over our soldering point that we just had right there. Typically use a heat gun, that right there. We're just going to use a little butane torch. We may use a heat gun. We got to get fuel. And all you're going to do is shrink it down. So if you're doing multiple wires coming in, your interferings, things like that, it's good to think ahead and kind of plan ahead to route those wires. Otherwise, if you're adding something like a tweeter on your stereo system or you're interfering, you're just going to add a couple wires to your stock setup. So all we're going to do, hold it about an inch or two away, and we're just going to make our way from one end to the other, and you can start to see that shrink. Now you don't want to keep the gun still on the heat shrink. You don't want to keep this still because it's going to melt right through and give you a point on there. And you can see from that, we're good to go. So it's a nice little soldering point, clean wire, running that through. Now the other end, here's some of the more important items on your stereo system. You may notice if you're going through it that there are different size terminals and connectors, and that's for a certain reason. When we are working with our tweeters, which are just a typical small speaker, as I like to tell people, but provides a lot of clarity and through your system, that's you're going to see two different size terminals. Can you see these? That's the first female terminal that we're working with, and then we have our larger one, like that. So there's a big difference in the size. This is actually your power coming out, and this is your ground out of your tweeter. So make sure you keep close attention. You can't just put one of your normal terminals like this on there and expect it to function properly. So when we're doing tweeters, keep an eye out for these connectors. So when we're doing hookups on any type of speaker on your touring bike, and you're adding, let's say you're adding tweeters to it, what we're going to do is we're going to take the same amount of wire down. I like to actually pull it back just a little bit, exposed wire, and we're going to crimp this terminal on this end. Now, you want to make sure you have some of the terminal on the back end over the insulation, the outer part of your wire, and then as you can see, this is sticking out way too far. That wire is way too far out there, so we want to pull it back. So I'm going to trim it down just a little bit more and re-put it on. And that way we've got just a little bit of exposed wire that won't hit any of your prongs coming out of the speaker or any of those other areas. So what we're going to do with this one is we're going to crimp it right on. You'll see it's split in half. I know many of you already know this, but the big error that everyone has on this is that they crimp one side and the other side comes over it. Now, a couple questions that I'm going to lead into regarding some of the speakers going in and out and radio decks going in and out. The reason likely for that is loose wires. I mean, 9 times out of 10 you're going to see either a blown fuse or a ground that's not grounded out, or a wire slipped. And on typical Harleys, we've got a few years that it's reoccurring. And if you're doing your own work, this is something I strongly suggest you pay a little more attention to than some other things if you chose to take that approach. So we're going to take this one right here in the 22 to 14 gauge wire, and I like to do the front on the wire and then pull it back and get the insulation. And what this is doing is providing a crimp both on the insulation and having that wire allowed on your terminal. So it's easy as that. And what I do as the next step with all stereo systems that I work on is I will actually solder this right here to make sure there's no possibility of it coming off or taking that kind of approach. So if you're into making sure nothing is problematic in the future, that's a good approach and taking it to that point. So going through just kind of a recap with these soldering and terminals with our stereo system, that's something to pay close attention to, choosing your proper gauge wire. On these larger wires that we're using here, your amp, which is I'm going to touch on here in a few minutes, is going to show three outlets on there. One's going to be the power, which all you're going to do on that one, we're going to do the same thing. Pull the outside down, and we're going to have exposed wire like this. We're going to toss it in the back of our amp, take the little Allen key, push the stud down, and then that secures it in there. I like to put it on the insulation part, so the entire metal part in the inside is making contact with the wire. And this gauge wire, along with about a 12 gauge, is good to use on those systems. Now on our actual speaker wires, I guess I could have flopped around and shown them to you on here. You're going to see multiple kinds of wires. This is one type. Actually, I'm going to get a free loom here. You're going to see this a lot. This type of wire on some of your systems. And My recommendation is, some of you may already know, the interfering has about 2 or 3 looms major in there to carry your stereo system, your lighting. You may have a hydraulic ABS unit in there that runs power. So there's quite a bit, and it can get confusing when you're running new wires. So I like to personally use this blue and gray running, because the gray will always be your ground, blue will always be your power. This can become a little confusing once you get in there to determine the proper ground and positive. So if you actually do hook up your ground and positive the wrong way on your speakers, it won't blow out, but you won't get as good of a tune or frequency coming out of there. So one of the little tips and tricks I can tell you about that is, I like to take a permanent marker or a Sharpie, and when you're routing wires, for say that you have left speaker, right speaker, and your deck in the middle, we're going to run one of these wires coming out of your speaker, the other one's going to come out of the other one, with a total of 4 wires. And to differentiate all those, and anything on your bike for that matter, that have the same wires, I like to put a dot on this one and 2 dots on the other one, right up front here. Can you see that? Zoom in on that one for me, buddy. And what we're going to do is watch these wires go on the other end and make that dot or 2. So when we're actually putting the terminal on or connecting these to another wire, we know how to differentiate those. It's a little kind of trick to get around getting confused. I know wiring can really put people into a frenzy and a 2-day headache, so that's a good way of doing it. The last thing I'm going to show you on these wires before we can start getting through stuff here is that when we actually splice these, a lot of times if you don't get it with your fingers, I started here, pull them back, and then I'll clip the fronts just to make sure there's no exposed wire that I just may have drawn out of there. And then we're going to pull these off, insulation off, insulation off, and I like to twist these, and then we're going to put the same thing, our terminals on, and draw that right out of the speaker. So always cut a little bit more wire than you may need. You never know where that loom's going to run, which I'll show you a pretty intense loom here shortly, but that's the big thing. Make sure these are drawn right through. All right, we're cranking away. All right, so the last component, I guess, what we'll mention here is the heat shrink and then our loom. So when I say looms, for anyone that doesn't know, what you're going to see in the back of your interfering is a loom coming over the top by your interfering mount that connects to your triple trees, and one coming through. And inside that loom is pretty much every wire you need to access for either cutting or redoing on your bike. And for us, I've always followed the policy that no matter if you can't see it on the bike, it's your craftsmanship and workmanship out of it, and we're going to make anything look good. So if another mechanic were to take it off and look at it, you have good credibility, and he or she knows that you did a good job on it. So I like to put this over every loom, and especially on the speaker system. There's been times where we've got bikes in and there's wires just drawn all over the place, trying to follow those. Make it easy on yourself, because you never know down the road if you're going to put a set of JL C3 speakers in that have a great output, and you want to be able to find those wires pretty quickly right off the bat. So maybe look into that. These are pretty cheap. You can find them probably at your local store. Otherwise, Kuryakin makes some great covers, and JL provides some of that as well. So keep that in mind when we're going through. All right, I want to just check to see if anyone's put any questions in. Not yet. Come on, guys, put some more questions in. So that's where we're at with tools. And biggest thing I can give you in the word of advice with the tools and wires and connectors is to take your time throughout this entire process. When you're wiring up your bike and making some modifications, take your time. It's electrical systems can be very, I guess you could say, very intimidating, but at the same time they're pretty cut and dry. You're always going to have certain components on there, and you're always going to have a power and a ground running out of there. So don't let that get in your way of tackling a task and maybe upgrading your system here. Yeah, that's what I got on that. So that's the major part. If you got any questions on any of this stuff, or even how to choose properly some of these wires that you didn't fully understand, drop it in the chat box with Fix My Hog, and we'll get on that for you. So I want to kind of jump into some of the additions here, and one big item that we have is the antenna. I know this is a huge issue personally with my shop. There's a ton of issues with antennas and the OEM's setup and things like that. So what we do on some of these touring models is we'll take the existing OEM antenna, pull it out, and we use a Dakota Digital antenna. It can be a little bit expensive, but you don't need that bulky antenna at the back of your touring bike. You can actually have this as a hidden antenna is how they market it. So what you do is you just drop it right on top of your deck. It's similar to this right here. This is a Sirius XM box that we put on some things, but it's similar to that. It's magnetic. You drop it on and you literally plug it in. It's one plug, and you just drop it right in, and it makes a night and day difference on there. You'd be amazed at the difference. So just pull your auto fairing right off your bike, and you'll see right out of the back of your radio or your deck that one cord. Pull that out, and then start working on just getting that whole wire taken out of your bike, and then you'll be good to go. The other item I actually forgot to mention is when working on your stereo system altogether, you have the ability to pop speakers. I know people say pop, but it's more of some of the internal parts just coming undone and untwindling. So the biggest recommendation on that and your entire electrical system is going to be to either pull your main fuse or pull both terminals off your battery. That way you have no live wires, you have no ability to just short out or get something just burnt. I like to say that. So make sure you just remove those terminals right off that battery and get going. So with antennas, I know there's a question regarding antennas, and you want to probably take a different look into it. I know Harley's had a few issues with antennas in the past and them coming about. So it's easy as that. It's just popping your outer fairing off, pulling that cord, and then installing that brand new antenna, and you're good to go. Assemble it right back up. The other thing that we see a lot is tweeters. People come in and say, I want to make my radio system louder, I want to make it clearer, or I don't want to hear my bike at all while I'm ripping down the highway at 80 miles per hour. And it's not only the tweeters. What I'm showing you here is actually the case for one. And when you're trying to get your system entirely tuned up, it's more putting a better amp in, it's fine-tuning on your end, and I recommend highly crossovers. And what crossovers are is you're taking an input and the output is 2 or more frequencies that are coming out, so you can really dial those in. You have about 6 terminals on there. You're just going to hook them up to your speakers and straight out of your deck and radio, and you're good to go from there. And literally it's kind of dummy proof, I like to say, because when I hook them up, you just put your wires in and then you just solder them on and you're good to go. So the crossovers do it. So it's not tweeters. I know that may be a presumption with some people, but that's not the only thing. And you can upgrade your speakers. We typically use JL Audio or Rockford Fosgate, which is well known in the motorcycle community. And those two I like to recommend a lot just because of their ability to adjust and fine-tune on the amps, number one, and then also it's a quality product to put on your bike that you don't have to worry about quote-unquote things popping or with a lot of vibration damage on the road. You were not going to have some of the internal speakers go out, which we actually just had a bike that had the left side working, the right side not, and it was due to the vibration on the roads. So those two companies take a great approach into that. All right, so the actual reason I'm holding this is for installation of new tweeters. There's speakers out there where you pull off the front cover, and you can actually just twist on and install your speakers right inside, or your tweeters inside your speakers, sorry, and put those on. The other route is to take this casing that the speakers or the tweeters come with and install them on your interfering. Now this is a little bit more advanced than just taking your cover off and screwing those on, because what you're doing with this is you actually need to use a hole saw, drill into your interfering, and install this case with a little silicone around the outside. And what that silicone does is help with vibration. So it not only seals and is protective against water, rain, you washing your bike, but it also seals it as well and helps with that vibration. Now when trying to locate and quote-unquote upgrade your stereo system with tweeters, it's as simple as 2 wires. And again, it's not too daunting of a task here to kind of run through, but location is key. And what I like to recommend is if you have a 6-gauge readout, or on your Road Glide, if you have ability to put them in by your holders on the right, drill that out and make sure there's nothing behind there like a bracket or anything that would obstruct from this going in. You're going to have 2 wires that pop out from here, and those are going to directly hook up to your either crossover, which can be mounted on your interference, or you can mount it, you can just run them straight to your deck, and it's easy as that. So that's with tweeters. Here's a different kind of casing that you can use as well, but you don't need to rely on tweeters really taking your stereo system to the next step. It helps, don't get me wrong, but when it comes down to it, it's more of your fine-tuning, and it's your amp that will help with some of your gains, as we say, frequencies, and also your bass boost with your speakers. So you're really able to help dial that in with your amp. So that's with tweeters and antennas. And again, any questions, check out Fix My Hog chat box and put them up on there, and I can answer them for you before the time's over today. But the other item is, we got a lot, so I'm trying to pick and choose because time's flying, is the amp. So the amp entirely is, we're going to wait on that. Your amp, you have 2 or 4 channels, and what that means is that you have the ability to work either 2 speakers, or you have the ability to work 4 speakers independently. And with anything we do, we typically use the JL 600, and that provides us with 6 channels. So we can actually work off the 2 speakers in the bags, we can work off 2 speakers in the front, and if we chose, the tweeters as well, so giving us 6 different sound components that we can fine-tune. When you have a 2-channel, it's not a bad thing by any means, but it limits what you can really adjust with your speakers and with your speakers. I'll just leave it right there. So when we're going through it, I recommend if you have the ability to do a 4-channel, but currently there's small amps that we have on that they're out there on aftermarket that you install. I would suggest putting a larger amp. The 600s are right around here, this size, and you just put it right on top of your radio deck. You're going to have your 2 interfering brackets right there. On top of that deck, you have some room. Make sure you leave about an inch for airflow to get through there and cool your deck. But if you want to add this whole new setup, put that amp right on top there with a bracket. I know there's a couple companies out there that make some brackets. We fabricate our own just to make sure it's smooth, but drop it right on there, and then everything routed around there so it's not obstructing your radio or things like that, or your outer fairing going out with the headlight. We've had issues where we mounted that amp right on top for an upgrade, and the outer fairing constantly hit that, so we had to modify that bracket. But with amps, kind of going back to the nuts and bolts of it, the amps are there to help amplify the noise. I mean, just what an amp is saying right there, amplify. So you're able to illuminate additional noise and frequencies. And when I say frequencies, that's a clarity point in your radio system. So if you want clear and concise words, and to be able to hear that with a little bass in the background, get a 4 or 6 channel amp and drop that sucker right on top of that deck and work through that. So at the end of the day, I guess if I were to recommend any kind of upgrades to you and take that next step into your radio system, it would be an amp. Additionally, you'll see some bikes out there that will have the amp typically in the bag portion of your bag or touring model. And that's a great point, but keep in mind we're going to have to route wires from the back of your bike all the way to the front, and vice versa if you're going to do the other one. We do 2 amp setups. A lot of people don't typically go to that extreme, but with these amps, it's a big contributor to clearing that noise up and modifying any trouble you may foresee in the future. So I know Harleys have, you know, their battles with their own bikes, as any company does, but those amps are a big part of your radio system, and to upgrade that is the next step. So keep that in mind moving forward on there, and your crossovers as well. If you want a whole system put together and to upgrade it, and even if you want to do on your double DIN setup interfering, you just put a touchscreen radio in there, or you can put a cover with a single-sided deck. And what I mean by that is like your car radio, typical car radios. Well, back in the 2000s, I should say. Now we have all this touchscreen stuff, but just one simple deck on there with your CD entry and a few plugs for your auxiliary and MP3, and put that in there, and the amp and tweeters would be your big step up from that point. So again, that's a big part. Your amp is a big part in there. Additionally, when changing, now we're going to jump into changing some of these speakers. So obviously you have your typical stock speakers in your Harley, unless you upgraded it. And what you're going to see back there is 2 prongs coming out. For instance, this is a cover for a JL Audio speaker, and with that comes a template. The reason for this template is either putting new holes in, or you have to modify 1 or 2 holes on there to your inner fairing. So, sorry, CD player. So when you get this template, what you're going to do is you're going to pull out your old speaker, remove both those wires coming out of there, make sure you know which is which coming out of that back of the speaker, and put this up there. A lot of Rockford Fosgates are going to have these as well. These were 4.5-inch speakers. 6.5 inches, pretty common on the back end. And again, some companies will come out with these. But put this directly up there, and before any installation, make sure all the holes line up. And then take it just to verify on your actual speaker and speaker cover that you're using. Nowadays, you're not going to see too many of these speaker covers on the outside unless it's on your bag. On the lid of your bag, you're going to see internal speaker covers, like an Arlen Ness Deep Cut, black and chrome. That's going to go on the inside, and that's going to go directly behind the interfering through. You're going to take your new speaker, take that up, and simply put the 4 screws in and plug it back up. Again, making sure you know where those 2 wires, one was positive, one was negative, and making sure those are in the correct position. And it's easy as that. You don't have to do any modifications to your amp just yet. You don't have to go through that. Just put your speakers in there, and that's the first step to kind of upgrading that clarity point with your system. And again, I like to double and triple check the work that we do. So one of the other components that you'll have to double and triple check is adapter brackets or this you'll commonly see on the lids below your speaker is going to be this to help with the angling of your speaker coming out. What I like to do again is put a lot of silicone around this to help secure and seal your speaker from any water damage, and put this through the bottom, and then your speaker is going to either drop through the top like this one will, or it's going to come through the back and mount up this way. And you may, if you're paying attention real closely, I continue to say silicone and sealing and vibration damage, and that goes into a big part with your amp and your deck and also your speakers. What happens typically in a lot of these systems with Harleys is that you'll have vibration damage, and what that is you consistently go down just an aggressive road. You're hitting quite a bit of potholes, you're hitting this, you're hitting that, and the internals of our speaker system and also your deck, it can't handle that much vibration. Even though you may have a dampening system on there and you've got the best top of the line front end, or if you have an air front end, that not only sometimes it just doesn't work. So I see a question from someone here regarding having trouble with the radio, and the question is, he's got a 2006 Ultra Classic. I'm having trouble with my radio. It started with the Harley right speaker pop in, then nothing but the left side playing. A few days later I have power to the radio and new sound. And this is huge. This is very common. What that either leads into is you have vibration damage on that. Give it some time and see if anything pops out. But if it's a permanent damage issue, what you have to look for is the root cause of it. So typically this is the interfering brackets have either shifted or modified or even broken. And that's allowing that interfering to jump better, move around as much as possible, taking all those internal electronics and shifting around. Not that aggressive, but it's bumping and shaking enough. And with that comes kind of your issues. So this is a common issue where you'll have power going to the deck and then nothing's out. Your speakers are probably blown. What you can do is take a multimeter or test light and make sure you have power coming to your speaker, and if you do, that's your issue, your speaker. Your electronics are going there, you have power going through and nothing coming out. So root to that. But I say silicone on these because that helps with that vibration damage. Even on, if you're putting a set of, let's say, a new deck in, or some 4-inch touchscreen on your double din, what you're going to do is on the inside of your fairing where it's not, you can't see it unless you have your inner fairing or your outer fairing off, put a dab of silicone all the way around, and that will help with that vibration on the inside. And not only does that help with the vibration damage that we commonly see, but it also will help with sealing. That's the second kind of contributor to troubleshooting and issues you're going to see on your bike with electronics and your wiring, is that when washing the bike or you're catching rain, you're going for that long haul, sometimes that rain gets in there, that water gets in there, and it will hit your electronics. And we try avoiding that as much as possible, obviously, but it does sneak around and makes its way in there. So it's critical that your speakers, number one, and your amp, number two, stay as dry as possible. I know sometimes it's not easy to avoid that, but that's a big issue. So keep that in mind, and that's why I kept saying silicone for those issues right there. All right, so we've kind of ran through the antenna, we've gone through the tweeters, crossovers, the purpose of those, helping amplify the speakers and helping with clarity and frequency, and then we've also kind of attended to the speakers. Again, it's plug and play with those. Not too much to worry about until we get to modifying the amp, which we're going to touch on here in a minute again. But that would be my biggest recommendation, or the easiest recommendation to upgrading your system is to kind of run through those components and see where you're at, and taking a look into what some of these manufacturers say. But again, look at your warranty on that and make sure you're in the guidelines for that. All right, so proper tuning of these. I know this is a big question with people, and it can be construed pretty quickly on how to properly tune it. Everyone's got their own philosophy with this, but what it really comes down to is making sure your gains and frequencies are put together in the correct manner with your speakers and your tweeters. Proper tuning is done partially with the amp. What we're going to be doing with this and going through is what you want to do on the back of your amp. You're going to see various dials typically, 1, 2, or 3, and there's going to be a gain boost, there's going to be a frequency, and then there's going to be a channel output. And we want to turn our gain boost all the way down, our bass boost all the way down as well, if you have a bass boost. And turn those all the way down, and we're going to adjust the frequencies up. Now, what I like to do is start right in the middle on those dials and then work our way from there around. So turn that gain down, turn the bass down, turn up your frequency. And if we have a 4-channel, if you're installing a 2 or 4-channel, 2 channels pretty straightforward. You're only going to have that set of buttons and dials. If you have a 4-channel, what you're going to have is you're going to have 2 sets of those. And the reason being is if you're hooking up your radio system or your speaker system to that, you're going to have specifically 2 or 4 speakers to the front section and 2 speakers to the rear section. So you're independently working those 2 systems, as I like to say, and we're able to adjust from there. And we're going to do the same thing with that. We're going to pull down the gain, we're going to work on the frequency, and then you put the gain boost up. And this is a point in your system where we can actually turn the bike on, and you can start to fine tune it by just hearing it. So turn that frequency up, you're going to hear the clarity in there, and then turn the gain up just a tad to probably about a 1/4 inch from the beginning point. And then if you need a little bit more, if you're hearing too much or too much static, turn it back down. And then the last thing that we're going to touch on is putting the bass boost up. And if you have a great system and you're using, for say Rockford Fosgates or JLs, they have these new C4s out that are pretty slick setups. You're going to be able to turn that bass boost all the way up and have that speaker, rather than having, just a typical bass in the back. You're going to be able to hear that bass coming through each speaker independently while still hearing that clarity of the speaker. I put Kid Rock on to listen to it on these things because he's got the background music and then he's got the vocal side, so you can really hear him screaming and shouting, but yet you can hear the bass. So to properly tune these, start with that. If you have crossovers in your system, that only will help with doing this because that automatically configures your system from your amp to your speakers, and that's kind of the way you'll set that up. But that's kind of the route you want to take. And also when you're going through the frequencies, you're going to have lows and highs filters on there, I should say. And that's what you're kind of looking for. If you have an additional amp an amp that will have an additional kind of high-low on there, play with that while the speaker's on. Just hit the dials over. It's not it's not a dial. It's just a simple switch, so you can put it in the high or the low, and that will help. And then also with your 2 or 4 channels, commonly made when people put it up, they get pretty jazzed about doing the whole system, and yeah, let's hear this whole thing, and they forget they have a 4-channel, they forget to put it over to 4-channel. So you're only hearing 2 of the speakers instead of the other 2 or 4 on the other channel, and your kind of hits the floor with that. But keep that in mind. Pay close attention to moving some of those dials around, and you can play with it by ear and see how you like it and fine tune it from there. All right, now we have the other, before I dip into some of your questions here, I can recommend some of these wireless applications to use on your stereo system. MP3 players, Bluetooth, wireless, and you can take it 2 different ways. With wireless on our stereo system, what we're only going to see more and more of nowadays, what you're running into is a connection error. So either we're not syncing up, we lose the connection, and there's additional items that you have to be careful of. But on the back end, if you're looking at doing a wireless system versus a plug-in system with an aux cord, it has both advantages and disadvantages with it. So keep in mind that you want to make sure that you're picking the right one for your suit. So I like to actually do both and have the ability to do both with our radio systems and mount an easy. There's a Kiriakin mount that we always use that's actually sealed with plastic or like a rubber around it, and we just hang it right there from the interference. It's a hidden mount. You can barely even see it. All you see is your actual phone or MP3 player, and put that right up there, and then you have the ability to just use Bluetooth wirelessly and then plug it in. But one of the common things that we see with the wireless areas is that when we get into, again, the vibration damage, that vibration can really shift things around in your electrical system and kind of take you around. So make sure to pay attention to that, and it's pretty straightforward with those things. It's either MP3, wireless, so keep that in mind. All right, I'm going to double check, see questions that we have here, and then we've already had some that were pre-submitted, and I'd like to get on that for you guys. So I've already addressed the 2006 Ultra Classic. You've got that issue with the radio after a few days, no sound. Again, check your brackets, make sure you get power out of your radio going up to the speaker, and it's typically not the switch. I know that that's commonly seen, or people say that it's the switch. It's usually not. It's something a little bit more quote unquote severe than doing a simple switch swap on there. We've also got a question. A 2012 Road Glide Ultra CD in radio won't eject. This is a kind of a tough one, because if you can take it two ways. I'll be straightforward with it. Take a pair of needle nose or tweezers and pull it out that way. And typically what it is, all it is that radio is pushing it up a little bit, and it's just hitting a lip or something where it won't eject. The other way, that's a little bit more fun and adventurous, is taking down a bumpy road and hit eject while you're going down, and 9 times out of 10 that thing will pop pretty quickly. So if you want to put on a scene, that's the other way. But or you can take another CD that you don't mind scratching up and just put it on top of that CD to force it down, and it'll pop out. But it's not a major issue with going forward. After you get it out, it's typically 1 or 2 times or 3 times you'll see it happen, and then it kind of falls into place from there. Additionally, the Harley radio, here's another question. The Harley radio on my 09 Ultra Classic keeps going on and off. The code tells me it's the left speaker. What should I do? I heard about this happening to a few Harley models in the past. What I'd like to, first thing I always do with troubleshooting things like this is to check the wiring. So 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a faulty ground, it's going to be a loose connection, you're not getting power, or it's a fuse. Sometimes you just blow that fuse right out of the water. So check your grounds, make sure it's grounded, and what that's actually probably doing, this is a common symptom that you'll see when you're hearing it going in and out. What that ground is probably doing is kind of jumping around or moving and not making a secure ground to the metal. So double check that ground coming out and make sure that's good. You can even relocate it to somewhere else to ensure that it's properly mounted, and then make sure your connectors are always in place. Sometimes you get a pin that pulls here or there, you get some tension against them, and that'll draw the wires out. So make sure that's in place and you're good to go on there. And the last item to check, given that those are all working properly, is your fuse. When your fuse blows, there's something on the back end. So if it is your fuse, what I like to recommend to people is to go through and figure out why that fuse popped. I see a lot of, and I hear a lot of cases where people just put a new fuse in, they're fine, issue happens again a week, a month, and it can lead to something more severe and damage-wise with your bike. If it's a wire that's gaining hot and it should be grounding, what that will do in that entire loom is heat that loom up, and then eventually you're going to have burnt wires all over the place, and that $10 or hour job of looking through and diagnosing that is going to turn into $1,000 of repair on your wiring system and a major headache. So take a look at why that fuse may have blown, and from there you can address it. And then hopefully that helps, by the way. Hopefully that. We've got I have a 2013 Electric Glide Ultra Limited. Radio reception is great until I reach about 60 to 65 miles per hour, then it starts to cut in and out. Is this possibly a problem with the antenna connectivity, or is there another possible problem? I would say it's the antenna right off the bat, not knowing everything else going on, or if it's an OEM system, I would say it is. If you've modified it a little bit, there can be additional items to check, but given that it is a stock setup, it's probably your antenna. The wires in there can get a little sensitive at times in the back, and or you have your connection on your radio deck or your display screen that is either coming loose. So check that out. Make sure that take that fairing off. Make sure your connection in the back is good, and then if need be, upgrade to another antenna. And like I said, that Dakota Digital, it's a pretty slick setup. I love it. It just drops right in, and there's no issues with those. So you can always upgrade that, and should solve your problem pretty quickly for you there. That can be a headache, I get it. Let's see, kind of shifting off stereo. We've got Stacy. I've got a 2002 Sportster starting problems. I changed everything from relays to solenoid and battery, and now it still makes the same noise but faster. So what's left? A new starter? This is kind of broad, but if it's not turning over correctly, I guess I should say, you're not making, what you actually have is you have a starter Bendix that jumps out. So you have your starter above your transmission, typically 9 times out of 10. And you have a starter Bendix that comes out and hits the ring gear. What that then does, that ring gear turns your entire clutch basket, which in turn turns your either condensator at the front or your front pulley, and that turns your crankshaft. So that's kind of the system that works with that. If your starter, you're hitting that starter button, you hear it whining and hissing and just not making any contact, I can probably guarantee you that it is the bolt that holds your starter Bendix on. That's pretty common. You'll see people upgrading that with like 26 teeth, or actually, sorry, 16 teeth, and that's for the purpose of making sure it engages on that ring gear and starts that puppy up and gets you ready to rock and roll. So check that. Make sure you check your starter Bendix, and if you're not hearing that whining or hissing, it's probably your starter, and kind of backtrack it to there. All right, we've got Paul. I'm trying to take a brake line off from the reservoir to the line where it connects to a line under the bike, 2008 Harley Classic. It looks like a T connection. Is there a way to disconnect them from the T line without removing the T connection? Let me get my head around this one. So the T connections that you commonly see, sometimes it's like a block. You can upgrade to this too if it's not already on your bike. It's a block with 3 holes drilled with threads. That's your brake, pretty much where you're splitting your lines, running one straight up to your front reservoir and master cylinder area. The other 2 are dropping down for your dual setup braking system in the front. So if you don't have this, I'd suggest doing that. But if you just have a straight line coming to a split with the T, you got to remove the whole thing pretty much. And not only, I know it may take a little bit more time, but I recommend doing this anyways, because you can swap out your banjo bolt if needed, but more so make sure those seals on either side, if you have rubber washers or if you have the copper crush washers, if you take and put new crush washers in too. So when you're trying to take it off, take it off because you get the opportunity to look into it too and make sure everything's functional. It's never a bad idea. And having a 2008, probably due to take a peek on it. Hopefully that'll help steer you in the right direction there. All right, we've got Guy. I own a 2013 Street Bob, totally stock. Is it normal for it to pop a lot on deceleration? No, it's not typical. I would look into your timing and see if that is playing an issue, and then also your fuel system and making sure you're getting proper flow of your fuel. Even on deceleration, you're still getting flow. So I'd make sure you check that out. But you shouldn't be getting a ton. You should have just the typical pop, pop, pop here and there. If you're in a lower gear with higher RPMs, you're going to hear more of it. So I guess it depends on how you're shifting too. But if you're dropping that down, and I would, those would be the first two places I'd look at and see if that was an issue. All right, we've got Jerry. Should I be concerned about using an extension when using my torque wrench? Are two torque, well, let me answer this one first. No, I'd be weary too on typical torque wrenches if you're using a digital or if you're using just a typical needle one. Nothing more than an inch or two on those. You can use probably about a 6-inch with still the same kind of torque. I got one somewhere here. So when you're taking that down, make sure you put your hand over the top and make sure it's securely on there. Otherwise, you're just going to kind of round out that nut or bolt that you're trying to tighten. But I wouldn't be concerned about doing that. Are two torque wrenches necessary, measuring inch and foot-pounds? No. If you're good at math, you can just figure out the difference. Otherwise, we have one digital one that we use. The other one that we sometimes use is a needle, and you can just hammer it out that way. You don't necessarily need two, but if you have the option, sure, grab two. So hopefully that helps you guys with some of the questions here. I know we're kind of running out of time, but I want to kind of recap on some things. With our stereo system, like I said, making sure everything's secure, making sure your crimps and solders are good, and you're running clean wires. Make sure you're using the correct wires. And I should say, if you're drawing power to your amp and you're trying to run a ground to, and you're trying to use a simple wire, a typical wire like this thing is going to burn faster than you've seen anything burn before. You want to use a larger draw because you're drawing a lot more wire than typical. Making sure you're choosing the right wires. If you're upgrading your speakers, make sure those are sealed, and you're checking to make sure everything's grounded properly. Your amp, if you're upgrading that or just installing a brand new amp, make sure that you take the time to tune it in and out and it's all hooked up correctly. Again, the positive and negatives on your speakers or tweeters are critical. Make sure they're in the right spots. And then also, tweeters, if you're hooking those up, simple as can be, either screw them right into the front of your speakers or remount them somewhere with two power wires or one power wire and ground coming out of there, and you'll be good to go. So that's kind of the typical setup with these stereo systems, and troubleshooting on them is as simple as hooking them up. You got to just run through and make sure you got a good ground, you didn't blow a fuse, and that everything is in its place and didn't get water on it. So if you got any more questions on stereos or you want us to go into a different video, make sure you you drop on our website, fixmyhog.com. Let us know what you think. Any other questions, let us know in that new chat box that we got going. And then also, don't forget to download that banner. You get some at the bottom of the screen, you should see now. We got some pretty cool stuff regarding the essentials, kind of the starter kit for your garage. So again, I'm Tommy Creal, contributing editor with Fix My Hog, and appreciate your time today. Hopefully we learned a few things. Thanks, guys.